Okay. We are now live online, so you're not muted, but if you like to be muted, you can mute yourself or I can mute you for you. So just be conscious of what you're saying. So, all right, let's jump in. I want to talk about the topic of peace. Live online, so you're not muted, but if you like to be muted, you can mute yourself. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. I had some weird feedback. All right, so let's get started. I want to talk about an interesting topic that pertains to our Parsha, and that is the issue of peace with our enemies. And I entitled it "Peace at All Costs." Must we? How must we strive for peace? Should we strive for peace at all costs? And so on and so forth. And I want to start with a vignette that I think is really interesting. The legend goes, I've heard this from a teacher who heard it from another teacher of mine. So the story goes that then Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, at the time he was preparing to meet with President Carter and Sadat, and he came on his way to Washington. He stopped in New York. And the legend goes that he met with three great rabbis at that time. He met with Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, he met with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he met with the Rav Soloveitchik. And the legend goes that he met with these three rabbis, and all three rabbis gave him the same advice. He said to these rabbis, well, what should I do when I'm negotiating for peace? What should I do? What should I say? What should be my approach? What's the Torah perspective on all of this? And supposedly, all three of the rabbis gave the exact same advice. They said, before you go meet with them, go and review this coming week's Parshat Vayishlach, which is our Parsha this week. Look at the Parsha and see how best to either find a diplomatic solution or prepare for war, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what I want to spend a few minutes with us today studying. And in fact, the Medrash itself tells us that our Parsha serves as the foundation for how we are meant perhaps to interact with other governments and other people. So with that introduction, let's actually look at our Parsha and to see what lessons we can learn that might be applicable to us today, and in particular to the state of Israel. So let's take a look here. I'm going to share my screen with you. I would like to start all the way here. 1 second. Okay. So let's get started here. So in Breshit, chapter 32, our Parsha begins as follows. We won't read all of it, but just to give you the main bullet points here. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav el Esav achiv arza seir sedei Edom. Yaakov sends messengers out ahead. He's on his way back to the land of Canaan, and he decides to send messengers ahead to his brother Esav in the land of Seir in Edom. Vayitzav otamlim, where he tells his messengers as follows: Ko tomrim ladoni le'Esav, go tell your lord Esav, Ko amar abdecha Yaakov im lavan garti va'echa ardata. Please tell him that for the last 20 plus years, which you have not seen me. Remember, the last time Yaakov and Esav saw each other, Esav was threatening to kill Yaakov because he stole the birthright from him. And Yaakov runs away to spend time with Lavan. He gets married, has 2 wives. He has 4 wives, let's call it, and he has 12 plus children, and he's on his way back now. He tells him to the messengers, these malachim. By the way, messengers, malachim, also could be used here to insinuate that they were also maybe angels themselves he sent, but nonetheless, he sends messengers, and he tells them to tell the message that I was with Lavan all these years. And in addition, Vahili shor v'chamor tzon v'v'shicha, I have acquired cattle and sheep and all this like other stuff and slaves, right? And I send this message in the hopes of gaining your favor. So what is Yaakov trying to do here? He is proactively reaching out to his brother and trying to let him know that he's coming back home, and he's trying to give him a story. Vayashuva malachim in verse 4, the angels or the messengers come back. El Yaakov lemor, they tell him, Banu el achicha el Esav v'gam halech likarcha v'arba meod ishimo. Well, we met with Esav, and I want you to know that he's coming to meet you, and he has 400 men with him. So if you were Yaakov, how would that make you feel? What's going on in your head if you're Yaakov?
Yeah. It's a big army.
It's a big army coming to get you. You'd probably be afraid. What was Yaakov's hope when he sent out these messengers to Esav? What did he hope in a perfect world would happen?
He could find them all without a fight.
Yeah, so he was hoping to meet without a fight. He was hoping to come to terms with his brother after all these years, right? That makes sense. And the Torah tells us that right after he finds out, the messengers tell him that he has 400 people with him. Look what the Torah tells us. All of a sudden, verse 5, Vayira Yaakov me'od vayetzer lo. He was very, very afraid. So what does he do? Vayachatz et ha'am asher ito. He splits the people with him. He splits everybody into two camps. Vayomer, he says, Im yavo Esav al machana achat v'ikahu, vayaha machana nishar li fleitaf. Esav comes to attack one camp, then the other one might yet escape. So what is he doing here in verse 5 and 6? How is he preparing for his meeting with Esav?
Dividing his armies.
Right, he's preparing for war, right? He's making battle preparations. Verse 7 continues, Vayomer Yaakov Elohi Avraham Elohi Yitzchak, Hashem Omer Elai Shuv Artzcha Madcha V'ti V'imach, Katonti Mikol Chasidim Mikol Hamet. He begins to pray to God, I'm unworthy of all your kindnesses. You have always protected me, right? Please, continue to protect me from my enemies. Verse 9, Hatzileni na miyad achi miyad Esav. Please save me, Hashem. And so please save me. And then he goes to sleep. So that's he goes to sleep. So what is the second thing that he does here? How is Yaakov girding himself and preparing for his meeting with Esav? He's praying. So first he prepares for war, and now he prays. And then the last thing you'll notice is, again, he wakes up. Did I cut it out? I accidentally deleted this part. Shoot, I'm very sorry about that. But let me tell you what he says after this. So he then also sends, I meant to leave one verse there. I'm very sorry. Oh no, here we go. I left it here. Verse 11. He selected that which was at his hand. He sent presents to his brother Esav. So he sends presents. So he prepares for war. He prays and he sends presents. And verses 12 to 22 are just the length of all the beautiful presents. He sends cattle and he tries to send them slowly, not all at once. He sends, a few and tries to separate them to make them look like there's more than there really are, to find favor in the eyes of Esav. So he prepares in three ways. And Rashi very famously tells us that how does he prepare? He prepares in three distinct ways. He prepares, look at Rashi, it says, Vayama chanani sharli fleita. So let's start from here. Hitkin atzmu l'shlosh dvarim. He prepared for three things. What was it? To give him a present, as it says. So the present passed before him for prayer, as it says. And he stated, "O God, my father of Abraham," and he prepared for war. When he says the remaining camp may escape. So he prepares in three different ways. So does anyone notice anything strange about this Rashi, about the three ways that he's preparing? What's the order in the Torah of how he prepares?
First, he divides his army.
First, he divides his army. What's the second thing he does? He prays, and then he gives presents. What is the three? What's the order that Rashi gives us? First, he gives presents.
First, he will fight him.
But Rashi says first he gives presents, right? Then he says that he prays, right? And then Rashi tells us that he's preparing for war and that he splits his camp. So Rashi switches up the order. And the Emes Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, explains that Rashi lists Yaakov's actions in order specifically of preference and their significance, and not in the chronological order. In other words, Yaakov was willing to do anything at all to achieve peace. Literally, peace at all costs. He was ready to give all these presents. He was ready to pray. The last thing that he wanted was to fight. He didn't want to fight with his brother at all. That was the last thing. He wanted to avoid war at all costs. So, and it happens to be that the Medrash tells us that it's not here on your source sheet, that whoever wishes to placate a king or a government and knows not their policy, nor can they predict their attitudes, Let him place this chapter of Yaakov and Esav before him and learn from it the art of appeasement and diplomacy. So what would be the takeaway? What's the modern takeaway, if you will, about from this Rashi about how we're meant to act against our enemies? Are we meant to, so again, I don't want to get into politics, but let's just talk, Iran. So should we, instead of monitoring the Iranian nuclear program right now, should we be sending gifts and presents to Iran? Should we be praying? What according to this Rashi, how are we supposed to be acting? We're supposed to be doing everything we can to avoid war. And what's really interesting about this is that Rashi is the only opinion that explains it this way. The other opinions, for example, the Ramban reads it very differently. Look at how Ramban reads this entire episode. It says Yaakov actually had no intention of ever fighting at all. That's just not who Yaakov was. Nichtava haparsha hazot lo dia ki yitzil HaKadosh Baruch Hu d'abdo v'galo miyad chazak mimenu vayishlach malach v'yatzilu v'lamdenu od shehu lo batach betzidko. So this episode is recorded in order to tell us that God saved his servant and delivered him from the hand of who was stronger than him. He sent an angel who saved him. It also teaches us that Yaakov did not rely on his righteousness and made efforts to save himself as far as he was able to. There is also another lesson for future generations that are alluded here, and that is that all that happened to Yaakov, our patriarch, with Esav, his brother, will happen to us continually with Esav's descendants. And it's proper that we follow the example of this righteous man and prepare ourselves in the three areas in which he prepared himself: prayers, gifts, and deliverance in war, and most importantly, to flee and to be saved. And Chazal noted this allusion in the text, as I shall explain. The Ramban says that Yaakov, when the Torah tells us that he splitted his camp into two sections, that actually had nothing to do whatsoever with preparing for battle, as much as it was about fleeing from battle. Ramban says also that there's this concept of Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, that which happens to our forefathers happens to us in future generations. So in the same way that this lesson of how Yaakov interacts with his enemy of Esav should give us strength and ideas of how we're supposed to deal with the Esav, the enemies, in our own lives as well, when we have our own countries to fight. And so this Ramban says that he had no intention of fighting at all. In fact, the Rashbam, what's the next part of the story, which we haven't seen yet? So take a look here. After all this happens, look here in verse 23. Vayakam b'laylahu vayikach et shtei nashav et shtei shivchotav v'yachal asar yadav v'yavor me'ever Yabok. That night, he crosses the Yabok River. Vayikachem v'yavirem al nachal et hanachal v'yaver et kol asher lo. He takes them across the stream and he sends along all his possessions. Vayivater Yaakov v'ado. Yaakov is left alone. V'yavek ishimo ad alot hashachar. He wrestles with the man until the break of dawn. Vayar ki lo yachol lo vayiga b'kaf yirecho. He realizes that he won't be able to prevail against him. So the angel, or this man, wrenches Yaakov's hip at its socket. He hits him and takes a cheap shot, and he now has to limp. And now this man says, "Vayomer shlachini kalel hashachar." He says, "Let me go because the dawn is breaking." Vayomer lo ashalecha ki im berchatani. He said, "I'm not going to let you go until you bless me." And so this man, which is again some type of angel perhaps, says, "What's your name?" He says, "My name is Yaakov." And the angel comes, and this person comes and says, "No, lo Yaakov yamer od shimcha. Your name should not be Yaakov anymore. Ki im Yisrael. Your name will be Yisrael. Ki sarita im Elokim v'im anashim batuchal." Because you have fought and overcome against both man and God, and you were successful. We don't need this line here. Sorry.
Rabbi.
Yes, sir.
I just read a book which said the title is "Arise and Kill First," and supposedly it came out of the Talmud. That statement came out of the Babylonian. I think I've got it right. If someone comes to kill you, you arise and kill them first.
Yes.
Well, in this case, if they come to kill him, he's doing just the opposite.
Yeah, so according to the Ramban, and the Rashbam actually explains that, the reason why he crossed the river at night? He was planning his escape. He had no intention of ever meeting up with Esau. In fact, there's another commentary that suggests that Yaakov himself is running away from his own family. And it's kind of in character if you think about Yaakov. Why is it that this angel fights with him that night? So one interpretation is that an angel is fighting with him to keep him busy so he can't escape. Like Yaakov has to go, he goes back, he forgot something on the other side of the river. He says, family, you stay over there, I'll be right back. And he goes, and his intention is actually to run away from the battle altogether. He's trying to sneak away, save himself. And the angel makes him stop and fight so that he's stuck there. And until the next morning when it's daylight, everyone's like, hey, where's Dad? Where'd he go? Remember, at night, you could just slip away. There's no light outside. You can literally disappear off the face of the earth. And that was, in fact, his intention. Now, in our times, the interpretation of suggesting that Yaakov planned to fight, it sounds actually very simple and straightforward. But you have to remember, in Rashi's generation, what's going on in Rashi's time? He's living during the time of the Crusades, right? Jews are being murdered all the time. This notion of standing up and fighting is very unusual. It's unheard of. So it makes a lot more sense. Like, again, we live in a time where the Jewish people have more power than we probably ever had or ever wielded. We have an army. We have a state-of-the-art aircraft and nuclear weapons in our own Jewish state. So when this idea that we should slink away in the middle of the night or that we should run away, that doesn't feel very very strong, because we're strong Jews in the modern time. But the Jew of the exile, again, we're living in exile too, but we're talking about pre the state of Israel. The idea that you would fight back against your enemies is unheard of. And if anything, you would do everything you can to find some form of diplomacy or try to protect yourself. And just one side point, by the way, just about this story about Yaakov. Let's take a look at this for a second. When Yaakov is fighting against the angel, he asks for a blessing. Look how Rashi suggests that he wants a blessing. He says, Hodea li al habrachot shebarchani avi, she'esav marer aliyahan. Admit my right to the blessings which my father gave me, to which Esav lays claim. What is it that he's saying to this angel? He's saying, give me the blessings. He already got the blessings. Why does he need the blessings again? Yaakov never really received the blessings. The blessings are Hakol Kol Yaakov Adayim Yidei Esav, the spirituality of Yaakov, but the might of Esav. Yaakov was a person who always was slinking away and trying to be a trickster, but he never had strength. The strength comes from his new name of Yisrael. He's literally a different person. It takes this moment of internal struggle or struggling with this man all night long for him to finally fulfill his destiny of getting the strength of Yisrael, of receiving the true blessings from his father. It takes this entire story for this to happen. But
Rabbi?
Yes, sir.
Where does it say or allude to Esau's intent? Was Esau's, we take it for granted that Esau's intent was to fight and to do harm to Jacob, but that's Jacob's point of view, because Jacob, didn't do right by his brother. But how do we know that that was Esau's intent?
All we know is this line right here, that he comes with 400 men to meet you. And that the Torah tells us that Yaakov instantly was afraid. But you're right, we don't know. And in fact, that's the big debate. When we actually look to see the moment when they actually connect with each other, take a look at what happens. So Yaakov, let's just read it quickly here, these 5 verses. Vayisah Yaakov in Avayar, v'nei Esav ba. He sees Esav coming, and sure enough, he has those 400 men with him. Vayachatz et ha'yeladim, he splits up the children. Alei al Rachav al shtei hashvachot, he splits everybody up into these camps. Vayasam hashvachot b'yalden rishona, v'Leah b'yaldei achronim, v'Rachel v'Yosef achronim. He sets them up and he puts, why is Rachel and Joseph the last group? Well, he's trying to protect them, because if something bad's going to happen, they're going to hit the first wave and then the next. In other words, he's showing who he cares about most. But what does he do, interestingly? But who avar lifnehem? Even though he puts the people he loves most in the farthest back, he still goes on ahead. Think about like in any movie, like, I don't know, like in Braveheart or like in Lord of the Rings or something, I don't know, where like the guy comes running out at the front of the battle with everyone behind him, and he does exactly that. He goes forward, but how does he react? he doesn't go ready for battle, but rather he bows low to the ground 7 times until he's near his brother. Vayaratz Esav likrato. Esav comes running at him. Vayabchabkehu, and he embraces him. Vayipol at savarav. Vayishakeu vayivku. He embraces him, falls on his neck, and he kisses him, and he wept. Now Rashi says that what does it mean that he falls on his neck? That he was trying to like chew off his artery and was trying to murder him. He was trying to pull like a Mike Tyson, right? Wasn't that the guy who bit Evander Holyfield's ear, right? He was trying to like hurt him physically by doing so, and yet he does, and yet he doesn't. But his Rashi says his neck like turns to stone. He can't do it, and then Esav literally falls on his neck, and he cries and he weeps, and he sees all these people, and they have this whole loving conversation between the two of them. That's what happens here. Now, one of the interesting questions that comes up from all of this is Yaakov's actions here. Is anyone surprised by how Yaakov acts over here? Why should Yaakov act so meekly? So let's take Rashi's interpretation. Let's say he's right that he was even the Ramban, right? So we should try to achieve peace, but is it peace at all costs? Is that what the Torah is telling us here? The language here of the Torah is that he's bowing down, he's prostrating, he's begging basically. Does that mean that we should debase ourselves and degrade ourselves to achieve peace at all costs? He calls him his master. He bows down to him 7 times. Is this what we would expect? If this text is meant to be a lesson for us about how we're supposed to interact with diplomacy, what is the Torah teaching us here? How far must we go to achieve peace? Do we have to always prostrate and be so meek?
Well, you can look at Jacob's life. He's not a sterling example of a stand-up guy. You know what I mean? He's cheated his brother on 2 occasions, and then he went off, and he's a little bit of a coward. He thinks that his brother is, with no evidence, his brother is coming to kill him, and if he didn't think that, he might think that perhaps he deserved it. Perhaps he did so much harm to his brother that if he was Esau, he would be attacking him. So, I don't think Jacob comes off in a good light here.
Well, let me say it differently. If we're supposed to learn about modern day diplomacy, again, not just in every generation, like the Ramban says, what is the lesson that we learn here when dealing with our enemies?
Well, when you look at this, and Yaakov wrestled all night, he had strength, and he had this ability to take care of himself, but he didn't show it toward his brother.
Correct. He's incredibly meek compared to his brother, even though, like you said, he wrestled all night, and he overcomes, and he finally fulfills his destiny where he has the strength of Esav and Yaakov together. And yet the very next verse is him bowing down to his brother. You could argue that this is the model that the Torah is trying to tell us, is that this is the archetype, if you want, about how we're meant to interact. And by the way, if you look back through human history, and Jewish history in particular, when we've lived in exile, the situation where we've always referred to our enemies or those who are oppressing the Jewish people as my master and your servant is a faithful representation of this approach that's characterized most of our past, right? And you know what? The strategy seems to work, because does Esav try to kill him? Not really, right? All it tells us is that it might look like he came with violent intentions with 400 people, but this begging and this bowing and the prostrating, it seems to work. What's interesting is, sorry, someone had something to say?
I was going to say Jacob has a guilt feeling from way back, but in the ultimate, his last position is to fight. So what it says is, we're going to do everything we can to pacify my brother, but if he wants to fight, I'll fight.
So you're saying something really interesting. I want to come back to that point in just a second, because you're referring to an idea that Rabbi Samson Hirsch says, which is just beautiful. But before we get that, there are some of the commentaries who actually criticize Yaakov for how he acts in this way, that he acts so meekly, that he doesn't show strength, that he doesn't show faith in God, that God will take care of him, right? So there's some who criticize him, and others actually see this as the model for how we're meant to deal with non-Jews. So for instance, in Bereshit Rabbah, Rav Huna teaches that Yaakov was unnecessarily asking for trouble by initiating any communication with Esav. He should never have even started doing like this. What should he have done? He should have just snuck in, right? This whole story, let's go back to our story for a second. Who's the one who initiates the conflict? It's not Esav that comes after him. Look, Vayishlach Yaakov malachim el Esav achiv. Yaakov is the one who sends forward messengers. You mean to tell me that he couldn't have snuck into the land of Canaan without his brother knowing? It's been 22 years. There's no fence on the border, right? He could just sneak right in. What's the problem? And so the Bereshit Rabbah, Rabbi Huna teaches that this is a criticism of Yaakov. He should never have done this. This just goes to show you why we should always just try to be mindful of staying in our own little corner and not engaging with anybody else. On the other hand, and by the way, the Ramban, take a look at the Ramban over here. Look at this Ramban. The Ramban actually says something remarkable. He says, Ve'al da'ati gam ze yermoz kenachnu itchalnu nefilatenu biyad Edom ki malchei bayit sheni ba'u bivrit im haromayim. He says that this is crazy. He says during the second temple period, the Chashmonaim, the kings there of Yehuda, they repeat the same mistake that Yaakov makes when they willingly initiated and entered into a covenant with the Roman Empire. So that covenant was in order to protect the Jewish people at the time, right? That's why they did it, right? They initiated, Edom here is Rome, right? They tried making a covenant to protect themselves, but in the end, what ends up happening, we know, it's known as the story of Hanukkah, by the way, right? What's the end of the story here, right? This covenant with the Romans invites the Romans into our lives. It opens the door to Roman domination of the territory, and literally leads to the story of Hanukkah and the downfall of the Second Jewish Commonwealth, right? Sorry, not to the story of Hanukkah, but this comes from Sefer Chashmonaim, right? So this is post that. It comes. This leads to the destruction of the Second Temple, right? They make this mistake. The Chashmonaim from Hanukkah make this mistake, and this leads to the destruction of the Second Temple. And so this goes to show you that we never want to be engaging in diplomacy with our enemies. We want to just kind of keep to ourselves and be meek and stay away from it all. But otherwise, it's a mistake. This was a terrible mistake that he was making. On the other hand, Bereshit Rabbah teaches us something interesting. Look at how Rabbi Yehuda Nasi once acted. This is the great Rabbi Yehuda Nasi who gets credit for the composition of the Mishnah. So he once directed Rabbi Afes to write a letter in his name to the emperor. And Rabbi Afes wrote, from Yehuda the prince, Yehuda Nasi, to our sovereign, the emperor Antinomus. So Yehuda read the letter and tore it up, and he wrote, from your servant Yehuda to our sovereign, the emperor Antonius. And Rabbi Afes remonstrated that Yehuda treated his honor too lightly. Why are you calling yourself a servant? You're a great rabbi. And Yehuda replied that he was not better than his ancestor, meaning Yaakov, who in our Parshat sent a message saying, thus says your servant Yaakov. So the Bereshit Rabbah sees this behavior as a guide for how we're meant to act at all times. They were always meant, in all of our negotiations, we're always meant to be meek and to try to do whatever we can to achieve peace at all costs. Now Jerome mentioned something interesting that Rabbi Samson Hirsch says, which is, what is it that's causing him to act in this way? What's actually causing Yaakov to act so meekly in front of his brother? So Jerome said something about guilt. Look at the words of Rabbi Samson Hirsch. Better to endure corruption and injustice for 20 years, as did Yaakov at the hands of Lavan, than stand one moment before an individual who we know has been injured by our hands and who is incapable of understanding the circumstances which might mitigate our guilt. In other words, we know that Yaakov dealt very strongly with Lavan. Why does he act so meekly? Why does he act so weakly in front of his brother? And the answer is that he's dealing with guilt, that he feels bad about what's going on. And so he can't find the strength. He doesn't have that same strength that he has with his father-in-law Lavan, who mistreats him and tricks him. And so he acts in this kind of more meek way. I want to show one other possibility as to how we're meant to understand this entire story and what we're supposed to take away with it. At the end of the encounter in chapter 33, Esav offers a deal to Yaakov. He says, why don't you come with me? Let us start on our journey and I will proceed at your pace. Let's go together. Let's be brothers. Let's go at this together. What does Yaakov respond with? He says, no, that's not going to work. We're very slow. My people are going to die. We can't keep up with you. You go ahead and I'll stay back, right? He says, you go ahead until I come to my Lord in Seir, until I come, ad asher avo el Adoni Seir. I'll catch up with you. You go ahead and I'll meet up with you in the land of Seir. Some interpret this idea that this is referring to Chazal, interpret this to mean that until I come to the land of Seir is referring to the Messianic age. In other words, Yaakov's actions throughout this entire story are not that he's willing to do peace at all costs. It's not that the model of Jewish diplomacy is one of weakness and begging for protection and begging for help from the outside. That is not the model. Perhaps the model is that Yaakov is teaching us that Chazal say that this line here, Ad asher avo el Adonai Seira, is referring to the times of Mashiach. In other words, Yaakov is basically saying, let's postpone this battle till another day, till I'm really ready to do it, right? Eventually, I will be strong enough. I'm not ready to fight today, but one day I will be ready to fight with you. So in other words, all of this, Yaakov's readiness to humiliate himself, it all stems from the fact that in his current situation, he lacked the strength to deal with Esav. And so he rather wanted to postpone and push off the battle until he'd be in a better position to fight. And in fact, in the Haftorah this week, Sefer Ovadja, sure enough, what's the prophecy? Halo bayomahu ne'um Hashem, ha'avadati chachamim me'edom. I will make the wise vanish from Edom, utfuna mehar Esav, and understanding from Esav's mouth. In other words, God is promising that he will take away all the strength of Esav, all the strength of our enemies. This is a generational fight between Yaakov and Esav for all time. These two brothers fighting one against each other, against our enemies. And the prophecy is that in a future day, God will remove our enemies and then we'll remove the strength from our enemies and then we'll be ready to fight. In other words, Yaakov's entire actions throughout our entire Parsha, yes, they're meant to teach us diplomacy, but interestingly, they're meant to teach us diplomacy to be smart. That we have to live to fight another day. That not every battle is meant to be fought today. That there is a future, like why does he act so weak and why does he act so meek? He's doing that very smartly because he knows he doesn't have the strength to win. Knowing when to fight and when to walk away is the key to good diplomacy and the key to good success. And I think really is the key to the success of how Israel continues to be a state that protects its citizens, protects the Jewish people, and please God has the strength to do so for many years to come. So we'll stop here, but before we do stop, I just want to make mention, I mentioned earlier, but for those who weren't on, that our learning today is sponsored by Ellis and Ellen Tavin in memory of Ellis's father, and we thank them for that. We pray that Ellis's father's neshama should have an aliyah. So thank them for that, and please stay warm. Everybody should stay cool, though, metaphorically, and looking forward to seeing everybody really soon.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Good class.